On a snow-choked forest road under a sky howling with Lake Superior's winter rage, a K9 mother lay chained to a tree, her
Let's get you
newborns
warm.
trembling against the cold that crept
Come
closer
on
with every
now.
breath. The wind showed no mercy. The night offered no witness. No one was meant to stop. No one except a former Navy SEAL whose truck slowed in the storm, a
We
battle-scarred
can't just
German
leave him here
shepherd
to
rising
freeze!
beside
You
him,
have to help
and
me!
instincts
Sir,
forged in
I need you to
places where
step back
leaving
now.
meant losing lives. They didn't know that driving on would have been easier. They didn't know this single decision would expose a darkness operating quietly beneath the surface. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story stays with you, consider subscribing for more stories of rescue faith and the moments that change everything. Snow came sideways off Lake Superior, erasing distance, swallowing sound, and turning the highway into a narrow tunnel of white where only headlights dared to exist. Jack Carter drove through the storm with both hands steady on the wheel posture straight, despite the long miles already behind him. At 36, he carried the quiet weight of someone who had lived several lives inside one body. He was tall, broad-shouldered without excess, the kind of build forged by function rather than vanity. A faint scar cut through his right eyebrow, thin, pale, old enough that it had become part of his expression. His dark hair was kept short, more habit than style, and a trimmed beard framed a jaw that rarely softened in public. People often mistook his silence for coldness, but those who had served beside him knew it was simply economy. Jack spoke when words mattered and nowhere else. Years as a Navy SEAL had trained him to read danger the way others read weather, yet it was the mission that went wrong in Kandahar, an extraction delayed by 10 seconds, that reshaped him. Since then, hesitation had become something he distrusted more than fear. Beside him in the back seat, but leaning forward between the consoles, sat Ranger, a 7-year-old German shepherd whose size alone filled space with authority. His coat was dense black and tan, winter thick with a dusting of frost gathering along his muzzle where warm breath met cold air. His amber eyes were clear, deliberate, always measuring. Ranger had once worked explosive detection overseas, partnered with Jack during his final tours. Retirement had not dulled him. It had only quieted the edges. He did not bark unnecessarily. He watched. When he shifted, it meant something. Jack was halfway down County Road 61 hauling medical supply crates meant for a veterans outreach center in Duluth when Ranger's posture changed. It was subtle ears, lifting, spine straightening, but to Jack it rang louder than an alarm. "What is it, partner?" he murmured, voice low, calm. Ranger did not whine. He stared through the windshield toward a dark shape ahead. A black SUV sat angled near a construction sign half buried in blowing snow, engine idling low. Its headlights were off, which in weather like this felt wrong, like a predator closing one eye. Jack eased off the gas. The SUV reacted instantly, tires spinning before catching traction, then speeding past him in the opposite direction. As it passed, Jack glimpsed the driver only briefly. A male silhouette baseball cap pulled low, mouth curved in something that might have been a smirk or just shadow. The vehicle disappeared into the storm too fast to be coincidence. Ranger let out a low rumble, not aggressive, but alert. Jack slowed further. That was when he saw the marks. Drag lines cut across the snowbank near where the SUV had been parked, jagged and uneven like something heavy had been hauled off the road. Dark stains dotted the white blood already crusting at the edges. Jack pulled over without thinking. Cold slammed into him the moment he opened the truck door, wind clawing down his collar. Snow crunched under his boots as he moved toward the drag trail. Ranger leapt down beside him, landing silently despite his sized nose already working the air. The trail led down a shallow embankment into a stand of pine half buried in drift. The world grew quieter there, the storm muffled by branches. Jack's breath slowed automatically, training resurfacing scan. Listen, assess. Ranger stopped first. There, wedged between two rocks and half shielded by a torn tarp, lay a K9 transport crate, its metal door bent outward. The lock had been forced, not broken by accident, but pried deliberately. Jack knelt, running a gloved hand over the crate's markings. A faded insignia, Private K9 Training Contractor, Midwest Division. Behind the crate a sound stirred. Not a bark, a breath. Jack moved slowly around the rock face and saw her. The K9 mother lay tethered by a steel cable looped around a tree trunk. Her name tag, half buried in frost, read Nova. She was a sable-coated shepherd, perhaps 4 years old, built lean and athletic beneath starvation's shadow. Milk still clung to the fur along her belly. Her ears twitched weakly as Jack approached, but she did not rise. Exhaustion had stripped her down to instinct alone. Beneath her ribcage, bundled in a torn feed sack, squirmed several newborn pups, tiny blind, their bodies barely larger than Jack's palm. Their whimpers were faint, swallowed by the wind. Jack crouched slowly, hands open. "Easy, girl," he said, voice barely above breath. Nova's lips twitched, not quite a snarl, more reflex than threat. Ranger stepped forward, then stopped 3 feet away, lowering himself into a seated posture. Head slightly bowed, not dominance, but reassurance. A fellow soldier speaking without words. Nova's gaze flicked between them. Her breathing steadied just slightly. Jack studied the cable. Not rope this time, industrial grade, tightened with a locking clamp. Someone had secured her here with intention, not haste. His jaw tightened. Then Ranger's ears snapped forward again. From the road above, the growl of an engine returned, slow this time, circling. Jack did not look up immediately. Instead, he reached into his jacket, fingers closing around his folding knife. The storm thickened, headlights bleeding through the trees like twin moons searching for what they had left behind. He exhaled once, steady. Whatever this night had started, it was no longer content to remain unseen. Jack did not rush the cable. The storm pressed in around the trees, snow hissing through pine needles like whispered warnings, but haste had cost him too much once to ever trust it again. He crouched beside Nova, studying the steel restraint looped tight around her neck and anchored with a locking compression clamp to the trunk behind her. Up close, the damage was clearer. Fur rubbed away in a raw ring skin beneath, swollen and bruised where cold metal had bitten deeper with every shiver. Nova's breathing was shallow, fogging weakly into the frozen air, yet her eyes never left the bundle of pups tucked against her belly. Ranger remained 3 feet behind Jack's body, squared toward the slope above amber eyes, tracking the glow of headlights that still drifted through the storm like distant predators circling the edge of firelight. Jack slid his knife open, the dull silver blade catching stray flakes. "Easy, girl," he murmured, not a command more. A rhythm meant to steady them both. Nova's ears twitched. She did not growl this time. Hunger, exhaustion, and the quiet presence of Ranger had reshaped her judgment. She allowed the stranger's hands to move close. The cable proved tougher than expected, industrial aircraft-grade weave, not something purchased casually. Jack sawed carefully between clamp and bark, angling the blade so it never grazed skin. Fibers resisted, then began to fray one by one. Each tiny snap sounded louder than gunfire in the muffled forest. Behind him, Ranger's posture stiffened again, muscles tightening like drawn wire. The engine above revved. Headlights flared through the trees, sweeping the embankment. Jack did not look up. He had learned that fear wanted eye contact. Courage worked better in silence. He cut faster, not reckless, but decisive. The final strand parted with a muted crack. The moment tension released, Nova collapsed forward, legs folding beneath her as if gravity had doubled. Jack caught her instinctively, one arm bracing her chest, feeling how little weight she carried for a trained K9. "I've got you," he said quietly, though the words were meant more for himself than for her. Ranger stepped closer, then lowering his head near Nova's muzzle. He exhaled slowly, warm breath cutting through the cold. Nova blinked, then let her chin rest briefly against Jack's forearm. Not surrender, not trust yet, but the absence of resistance. Jack worked quickly now, shifting the feed sack open. Inside, 5 newborn pups writhed weakly, blind and searching, their thin cries barely louder than wind against bark. He checked each one, the way muscle memory guided him: touch for warmth, fingers near nostrils for breath, palm cupped around rib cage for rhythm. All alive, barely, but alive. He stripped off his heavy canvas jacket, lining it across the snow to block wind, then lifted the pups one at a time, tucking them against Nova's side beneath the tarp. Ranger moved uphill without instruction, placing himself between the forest and the road silhouette, firm against the storm. That was when Jack's phone vibrated, signal flickering in and out this far from town. He hesitated only a second before calling the one person he trusted with both animals and emergencies. The line rang twice before answering. Hayes came a woman's voice, steady, low, threaded with fatigue that came from long hospital shifts rather than weakness. "Emily," Jack said, "I need field trauma help. K9 mother, newborn litter, hypothermia, possible abuse case." A pause, papers shuffling, keys jangling. "Location?" she asked, tone already sharpening into professional focus. Emily Hayes was 32, an ER trauma nurse at St. Luke's Hospital in Duluth. She was tall and narrow-framed, all tendon and endurance, with chestnut hair usually pulled into a practical knot that never quite held through a full shift. Her skin carried the pale gold tone of someone who worked under fluorescent lights. More than sun, and faint shadows lived permanently beneath hazel eyes that had seen too many midnight emergencies. Compassion defined her, but not softness. Years earlier, she had lost her younger brother in a winter highway pileup when paramedics arrived 6 minutes too late. Since then, Emily treated time itself like an adversary. She refused to let win twice. "Send coordinates," she said. "I'm bringing neonatal supplies." Jack ended the call just as the SUV engine roared again above. This time it did not descend. It idled, watching. Snow sprayed as the tires shifted. Jack memorized the sound, the rhythm of the idle, the slight misfire on every third rotation. Ranger did not bark. He simply stared uphill, body unmoving, as if daring the darkness to cross the line he had drawn. Minutes stretched. Then the engine faded, retreating into the storm once more. Jack exhaled slowly. He lifted Nova carefully, supporting her hindquarters as he carried her toward the truck. She did not resist. Her head rested briefly against his shoulder, breath warm despite the cold. Ranger followed close, scanning the tree line until they reached the vehicle. Jack laid Nova across the rear floor, pups bundled beside her heater, already blasting thin streams of warmth into the cab. As he shut the door, snow thickened again, swallowing tracks, swallowing evidence, swallowing the place where cruelty had tried to hide its work. But the night was no longer empty. Emily was already on her way. The storm did not loosen its grip, but inside the truck a fragile pocket of heat began to form, thin as hope, yet stubborn enough to hold. Jack kept the engine running, heater pushed to its limit, one gloved hand resting lightly against Nova's rib cage to feel each shallow rise of breath. Frost still clung to her whiskers, but the violent tremors had softened into intermittent shivers. Ranger sat upright in the passenger seat, now posture squared toward the windshield, ears forward, tracking every passing shadow in the snow as though the road itself might lunge. Headlights appeared nearly 40 minutes later, steady, controlled, not hunting. A silver Subaru Outback rolled to a careful stop behind Jack's truck, hazard lights blinking amber through the whiteout. Emily Hayes stepped out into the storm without hesitation, medical duffel slung across her shoulder. She moved quickly, but not chaotically, boots planted with the balance of someone used to ice. Up close, the cold painted her cheeks, crimson strands of chestnut hair escaping the knit cap pulled low over her ears. Her frame looked almost too slight for the weight she carried, yet her movements were precise, economical, every gesture sharpened by years of trauma room urgency. The hazel eyes, Jack remembered, were clearer tonight, focused, scanning the situation before he even finished explaining. "Let me see her," Emily said softly, climbing into the rear seat. Her voice carried that rare combination of gentleness and authority that made panic step aside without being ordered. She removed her gloves and warmed her hands briefly against a portable heat pack before touching Nova, never cold skin on cold skin. "Good girl. You held on," she murmured, fingers tracing the bruised ring around Nova's neck. Her jaw tightened, not in shock, but in recognition of cruelty she had seen before in human victims. She opened the duffel, revealing vacuum-sealed neonatal wraps, thermal pads, syringes, electrolyte gel. "You weren't exaggerating," she said to Jack. "They're minutes from systemic hypothermia." She worked fast, but nothing about her movements felt rushed. Each pup was lifted, checked, wrapped, and placed inside an insulated carrier she had brought. One pup's breathing stuttered. Emily tilted its tiny body, clearing mucus from its airway with practiced suction, then rubbed its chest with 2 fingers. The pup let out a thin, defiant squeal, small as a cracked bell, but alive. Jack exhaled for what felt like the first time in an hour. Ranger leaned closer, nose hovering just above the carrier, not touching, simply verifying life. Emily glanced at him. "He's trained medical?" she asked. Jack shook his head faintly. "Explosives detection, but he doesn't like losing anyone." Emily nodded once, as if that answered everything. Nova stirred weakly when separated from her pups, anxiety flickering through her exhaustion. Emily anticipated it guiding 2 of the wrapped pups back against Nova's belly to maintain scent and contact. "Stress shock kills faster than cold, sometimes," she explained quietly. "She needs to feel them breathing." Jack watched her work, struck, not for the first time, by how battlefield medicine and emergency nursing spoke the same language, different uniforms, identical urgency. As Emily finished stabilizing the litter, a second set of headlights approached, but slower, deliberate, stopping at a distance rather than closing in. A county sheriff cruiser. Jack's hand instinctively moved toward the door handle before he recognized the vehicle markings. The driver stepped out, a tall man in his early 40s, shoulders slightly stooped from years in body armor. His name tag read Deputy Marcus Doyle. He had the weathered face of someone raised outdoors, sun-creased skin, sandy beard kept short, but uneven, as if grooming ranked low on his priorities. His eyes, however, were sharply observant, pale blue, and constantly measuring. Marcus had once served Marine infantry before returning home to Minnesota after his father's stroke. Law enforcement had not hardened him, it had simply redirected his sense of duty into quieter battles. He approached slowly, hands visible. "Carter," he called over the wind. "Dispatch flagged your coordinates." "You good?" Jack nodded once. "Not a wildlife case," he said. "K9 trafficking. Steel restraint. SUV involved." Marcus's expression darkened, not surprise, but confirmation of suspicions long forming. "We've had reports," he admitted. "Training dogs disappearing before contract transfers. No proof until now." Emily stepped out briefly, handing him a thermal scan print from her portable reader. "Mother's core temp borderline. Pups critical but viable." Marcus studied the injured Nova through the open door, his jaw flexing. "Whoever did this knew exactly how long they could leave them alive," he muttered. Ranger watched him carefully, then relaxed a fraction, reading sincerity the way dogs often did, better than humans. Snow thickened again, forcing decisions. Marcus activated his cruiser dash cam, documenting the scene, tire tracks, drag lines, what little the storm hadn't erased. "I'll escort you back," he told Jack. "If that SUV circles again, they'll see blue lights first." The convoy formed quietly, sheriff cruiser ahead, Jack's truck in the middle, Emily following behind. 3 vehicles cutting a slow path through the blizzard, law, rescue, and medicine moving together like parts of one organism. Inside the cab, Nova's breathing steadied under the thermal wraps. The pups twitched in their insulated carrier. Ranger finally lay down, chin resting near the door, vigilance easing into guarded watchfulness. Jack drove with steady hands, but his thoughts had shifted. This was no longer a roadside rescue. It was evidence. It was organized cruelty. And somewhere ahead, beyond the storm and headlights, waited the place where this trail would lead. For now, though, there was only one priority: get them home alive. By the time the convoy reached Jack Carter's property, the storm had thickened into a white curtain so dense it blurred the world down to instinct and headlights. His house stood at the edge of a pine line overlooking the frozen stretch of Lake Superior, a modest wooden structure built decades earlier by his father, its beams weathered but stubborn like something that had learned to endure rather than impress. The porch light burned a dull amber circle into the snow as Marcus Doyle's cruiser pulled ahead and swept the driveway, once checking for unfamiliar tire tracks before signaling the all clear. Jack parked close to the steps. He killed the engine only after Emily had gathered the insulated carrier and thermal wraps. The cold surged in the moment the doors opened, biting through fabric and bone, but inside the house warmth waited in potential rather than reality. Jack had left the furnace running before the supply run. Still, the air held that hollow chill of rooms too long unoccupied. They moved quickly. Ranger entered first, without command, boots crunching behind him as he crossed the threshold, and immediately scanned the interior, ears pricked, posture alert. Only when he gave a faint huff clear did Jack step fully inside, with Nova in his arms. Up close, her weight felt even lighter than before, ribs sharp beneath fur that should have been dense and battle-ready. He laid her gently on a quilt near the hearth while Emily arranged heat lamps and insulation pads she had brought in portable cases. Marcus remained near the doorway, snow melting off his shoulders in quiet rivulets. Law enforcement instinct kept him between the outside world and the fragile lives now inside. He spoke little, but his pale eyes tracked everything: the layout, the exits, the line of sight to the driveway. Years in uniform had carved caution into him the way wind carved stone. Emily knelt beside Nova, checking capillary refill along her gums, adjusting the thermal wrap with delicate precision. "She's stabilizing," she murmured, more to the room than to Jack. She moved next to the pups, opening the carrier just enough to check respiration and color. Their tiny bodies twitched under the warmth, small signs of returning life. A knock sounded at the door, then 3 steady raps, spaced politely but firm enough to carry through the house. Marcus's hand moved automatically to his radio. Ranger rose from beside the hearth, silent but coiled. Jack opened the door cautiously. Standing on the porch was an older man, wrapped in a heavy wool coat dusted with snow. He removed his hat, slowly, revealing a crown of silver hair flattened by winter air. "Name's Dr. Leonard Whitaker," he said, voice low and gravel-edged from decades of rural practice. He looked to be in his late 60s, tall once but now slightly bowed through the shoulders. Not weakness, but the long habit of leaning over exam tables and injured animals. His face was sharply lined, skin tanned and creased by sun rather than age alone, and a neatly trimmed white beard framed a mouth that rarely wasted words. His eyes, however, were steady and kind behind wire-rimmed glasses, blue-gray observant, the eyes of someone who had spent a lifetime deciding which lives could be saved and which could not. Emily glanced up from Nova and nodded. "I called him," she said quietly. "Best large animal and K9 vet within 40 miles. Retired officially. But he doesn't ignore midnight calls." Whitaker stepped inside without ceremony, shedding his coat and revealing a plaid flannel shirt beneath sleeves rolled despite the cold. His movements were unhurried but efficient, each gesture practiced into muscle memory. He knelt beside Nova, letting her scent his hand before touching her. "Good girl," he murmured, voice softer now, as if tuned to animals rather than people. Nova did not growl. She only watched him with tired, searching eyes. He examined the neck wound, the bruising, the muscle tone. His brow furrowed, not alarm, but calculation. "Cable restraint," he said quietly. "Industrial grade. Whoever did this knew K9 physiology, tight enough to immobilize, not tight enough to suffocate immediately." The statement settled heavily in the room. He moved to the pups next, warming his hands first before palpating their tiny ribs. "They've been cold but not frozen. That window's narrow. You caught it just in time." He prepared a mild glucose solution and showed Jack how to administer it with a microsyringe. Jack listened intently the way he once memorized extraction protocols. Marcus stepped forward, then lowering a clear evidence bag onto the table. Inside lay the cut steel cable, the clamp, and the torn tarp Jack had recovered. "Forensic pickup in the morning," he said. "Storm will delay it, but chain of custody starts now." Whitaker studied the clamp through the plastic. "Dock-grade freight hardware," he noted. "Not farm supply. Someone with shipping access." The pieces began aligning, not loudly, but inevitably. Emily finished securing the pups near Nova's belly, allowing contact warmth while maintaining thermal stability. Ranger settled nearby, head resting on his paws, but eyes still half open, guardian even in rest. Jack stood for a moment near the hearth, watching the fragile circle of life that had formed inside walls he once considered empty. The storm rattled the windows, but it no longer felt like an enemy pressing inward. Inside there was purpose now, structured, deliberate, shared. Whitaker rose slowly, joints stiff but steady. "They'll live," he said at last. "Not without care. But they'll live." The words did not sound like hope. They sounded like verdict. Winter did not end in a single sunrise. It loosened its grip the way pain leaves the body slowly, reluctantly, in small mercies that gathered until the air itself felt lighter. By the second week after the rescue, the snow around Jack Carter's house had begun to recede in uneven patches, exposing strips of dark earth and frozen grass like old scars surfacing after healing. Inside the house no longer carried the hollow quiet it once had. It breathed now softly, warmly, filled with the fragile sounds of life that refused to be silenced. Nova lay near the hearth, her strength returning in measured increments. The raw band around her neck had begun to close, fur slowly reclaiming the wounded skin beneath. Where once her ribs pressed sharply against her coat, there was now the faint rounding of restored muscle. She remained vigilant. K9 training did not leave easily, but the tremor of fear had faded, replaced by a steadier watchfulness. When Jack entered the room, she no longer tracked him as a potential threat. She lifted her head, studied him briefly, then rested her chin back down beside her pups, a silent acknowledgement of trust earned rather than given. The puppies had changed most dramatically. Their eyes had opened fully now, dark, unfocused at first, then sharpening with each passing day. They stumbled across quilts and hardwood, alike legs too large for coordination, barking in thin, determined bursts that sounded more like questions than declarations. Ranger endured their curiosity with stoic patience. The 7-year-old shepherd had become an anchor in their tiny universe. They climbed over his paws, tugged his fur, even fell asleep against his flank. He never corrected them harshly. He simply shifted when needed, the seasoned veteran tolerating rookies with quiet dignity. Dr. Leonard Whitaker visited twice more during recovery, each time arriving in the same weathered truck that rattled louder than it should. He brought supplements, examined Nova's gait, checked the pup's reflexes. On his third visit, he carried documents instead of medicine. "They're clear," he told Jack, setting the folder on the table. "No active ownership claim. Whoever trafficked her severed registration ties illegally. She's free property now, legally speaking." His tone carried faint disapproval of the phrase, but the meaning was clear. Deputy Marcus Doyle followed up days later with confirmation of arrests tied to the trafficking ring. The SUV driver had been identified, warehouse logistics supervisor connected to missing K9 transport reports across 2 states. Charges were filed quietly, efficiently, without spectacle. Marcus delivered the update standing on Jack's porch hat, tucked beneath his arm. Expression firm, but satisfied. "You didn't just save dogs," he said. "You cracked a pipeline." Life settled after that, not into silence, but into rhythm. Word spread through Duluth, not loudly, but the way good things traveled through gratitude, through quiet admiration. One afternoon, a woman named Clara Bennett arrived at the house carrying a woven basket lined with fleece blankets. Clara was in her early 50s, medium height, with sun-warmed skin and silver-threaded auburn hair braided loosely down her back. Years spent running a lakeside animal foster network had shaped her posture into something both gentle and resolute. She spoke softly, but there was iron beneath it, the strength of someone who had rehabilitated abandoned animals long before compassion became fashionable. "I heard about Nova," she said. "Not here to take her, only to help place the pups when the time comes." Jack hesitated at first. Attachment had crept up on him quietly. He knew each pup's bark, each pattern of sleep. But Clara's presence carried no pressure, only partnership. She spent afternoons socializing the litter, introducing scent blankets, gentle handling routines, early temperament observations. Under her guidance, the pups grew not just stronger, but ready. The adoptions happened slowly, respectfully. A retired firefighter took one, a calm male pup who preferred sleeping near Boots. A young search and rescue volunteer adopted another. Each departure tugged at the house but did not empty it. Care, Jack realized, did not diminish when shared, it multiplied. Through it all, Nova never strayed far from him. She followed him onto the porch at sunrise, sat beside him as he repaired fence posts, rested at his feet near the fire each evening. The choice settled not in paperwork but in proximity. She had decided without ceremony that this was her post now. One evening, as the last snowmelt dripped from the eaves, Jack sat on the porch steps, Ranger on one side, Nova on the other. The lake beyond had begun to crack open, dark water showing through white like a promise-breaking surface. He reached down absently, fingers brushing the place where the cable scar had been. "You're not filing a complaint about unlawful rescue, are you?" he muttered. Nova exhaled softly, leaning her weight against his knee. Ranger huffed once as if amused. The sun dipped low, casting amber light across the thawing land. Inside the house, the quiet no longer felt empty. It felt complete, not because the storm had never come, but because when it had, someone had chosen not to drive past. And sometimes Jack understood now family was not assigned by blood or duty, but formed in the moment a life decided to stay when it finally had the strength to leave. At the edge of winter, when the storm had taken almost everything it could, the miracle did not arrive as thunder or blazing light. It came quietly, wrapped in breath, warmth, and the simple refusal of one man to look away. Sometimes we pray for God to stop the storm, but more often, He answers by placing the right hearts on the road while the storm is still raging. Jack did not part the snow. He did not silence the wind. He simply chose compassion in a moment where cruelty expected silence. And in that choice, lives were saved, wounds were healed, and a broken house learned how to feel like home again. In our daily lives, miracles rarely announce themselves. They appear in small decisions, stopping when it's inconvenient, helping when it's costly, caring when no one is watching. Faith is not only found in churches or prayers whispered at night. It lives in the hands that rescue the voices, that defend the voiceless, and the courage to stand between innocence and harm. God works through ordinary people willing to do extraordinary kindness. If this story touched your heart, let it remind you that even the smallest act of mercy can echo far beyond what we see. Share this story with someone who may need hope today. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from. We would love to hear your voice and your story. And if you believe in stories of faith rescue and quiet miracles, subscribe to the channel so these messages can continue reaching hearts around the world. May God watch over you, your family, and every road you travel. May He place warmth in your home, strength in your spirit, and light beside you, especially when the storm feels closest.